Hello and welcome to our session today, Creating a Cross-Cultural and Inclusive Online Learning Environment in Today's Global Classroom. My name is Lita Downs and I'll be moderating the session today. And on the session we have Dr. Tracy Masiello, Dr. Shiropa Sarkar, and Dr. Mary Pignon. Our presenters originally presented this information at the Walden 2020 National Faculty Meeting in Tampa, Florida. And we're very thrilled to have them for today's session to present to us today. So without any further delay, I'm turning things over to Dr. Masiello. Welcome.
Thank you. So here at Walden, we find ourselves educating a very diverse global population of students who have backgrounds and viewpoints that are sometimes very different from our own. And as educators, our goal is to help our students to gain knowledge of the content that's in our courses. And we find that that can best be achieved when we can engage them with the content in a really meaningful way. But to do this means we have to be able to reach all of our students, even those whose perspectives could be different from our own. So it's important that students be able to see themselves in the content that we present so that they can see its relevance to them, and also to help them foster a sense of being part of the classroom community. And both of these things can lead to enhanced learning for the student and better student retention in our programs. So the question that we're asking today is, how inclusive are you? It's a question that I'm continually having to ask myself as well, which is, how inclusive am I? And what we're really talking about as we consider that question is three sub-questions. The first one is, how are we promoting access to and participation in the curriculum for everybody? That means that we are trying to create an environment where every student feels welcome. Because if a student feels that their beliefs or perspectives are so different from the rest of the class, they can become that student, so to speak, who sits quietly in the back of the class, the student who is uncomfortable speaking up and engaging with the others. So in an inclusive classroom, really everybody feels welcome to be able to share their perspectives. So the question that we really want to ask, the first question, is, do we give thought to our students' social and cultural backgrounds? We really need to take the time to learn about our students and to find out about their background. So if I have a student who's from a country or a culture that I really don't know very much about, I'm going to take some time to learn about it so I can use those examples that are going to be relevant to that student during the course. Or I might ask that student to specifically to share something about their viewpoint and get the student's take on something. And I've learned a lot in doing this myself about different people, different viewpoints and perspectives that differ from my own background. And the next question is, what steps do we take to identify and to remove potential barriers to students' ability to be successful? So an example that, that comes to mind easily is students who are not native English speakers. Sometimes what they write in the classroom can be difficult to understand. The syntax isn't correct or the grammar. But when I've had opportunities to speak with them, whether at residency or they have a question and they call me on the phone, I find that they're very much able to articulate thoughts through speech. So what I've figured out is, it's not that they don't understand the material, but it's that writing the material and writing in this discussion post is the challenge. And so because of their writing and because it was difficult to understand what they were posting, other students were not engaging with them by responding to their posts. So something I started doing was offering students the opportunity to provide like an audio file or something to go along with the written post. I still keep that written requirement because of the rubric, but when students share that and are able to talk through their ideas, they make it about a minute long or so, other students engage with them. And I'll say here that inclusion really is a work in progress. It's something that we have to consistently keep paying attention to and being mindful of as we try to improve our own design and how we can include others. Because if we don't do that, then we might risk excluding people without meaning to. So that's the framework that we're using today. We all have judgments that we make sometimes, and those judgments are based on our schemas, which can be connected to our biases. And as I'm using the term biases here, what I'm really talking about is how you see and relate to the world around you, that product of your experiences, culture, and your values. So we really have to think about our own biases and how that colors how we design and how we facilitate our courses. because I really believe strongly that we have a duty to provide culturally relevant content in our classrooms. And I'll talk in just a little bit about some ways that we can actually do that. But when we're talking about inclusive pedagogy, it really considers the overall student's ability. It doesn't matter the race, the religion, the culture, the gender of the student. This notion incorporates everybody, so everybody is included or sees themselves in the curriculum. Inclusive pedagogy really is related to critical theory. And when you make that connection, you have a framework for addressing religious or racial or gender or cultural differences. So we'll go to the next slide. So we start by engaging in reflection. It's really important because if I don't reflect on my own actions, then how am I going to make change, right? If I don't reflect on my biases, how am I going to change? And of course, if I don't reflect on my teaching, how am I going to change? So reflection is a really important initial step in having an inclusive classroom. But reflection really isn't enough. I mean, you can reflect all day long, but that really isn't going to create any type of purposeful change. So to have purposeful change, it means that we take what we learn from that reflection and then we use it to actually make changes to our teaching practices. So it does require making an intentional plan. How are we going to arrange our discussions? How do we put individuals with different religious or gender or orientation or other backgrounds into the course, like through the examples that we use? And again, it goes back to this idea that this really is always a work in progress. And once we have that plan for how we can do that, then this really does mean being willing to make a commitment to having that inclusive classroom environment and be willing to commit to putting the plans for change into our actual teaching practice. And this commitment leads to making the changes that then transform our teaching so that we really do have or start to create an inclusive classroom environment that meets the needs of all of our students. It does take effort to do this because it's constantly evolving. It's not something that we do in a one-time event, but it really requires that we embrace this idea that we have to have continual reflection, keep making change in response to the reflection, and then that we be willing to take personal action to be inclusive in the classroom. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So how do we actually go about doing this? How do we infuse inclusion into our online coursework in our online classroom? So I'm going to let Dr. Sarkar share about how inclusion can be infused within the online classroom at the curriculum level. And we're going to use the developmental psychology program as an example to walk through.
Thank you, Dr. Maciello. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Srirupa Sarkar, and I'm going to discuss the integration of cross-cultural content into our developmental psychology program. If we think about the prior slide that Dr. Maciello just presented, that's the structure pretty much we followed. When we have been teaching for the MS in Psychology program for a while, what I've noticed is most of the course curriculum were very much US-centric, West-centric, and also is US mainstream-centric. So I did not find a lot of cultural sensitivity or cultural themes that included in the coursework. And we do have a huge population of students from different cultural backgrounds. And by culture, I mean different racial groups, ethnic groups, different countries. And that's something that was lacking from most of our curriculum. That was also in line with laureates' focus on international themes and topics included in all of our strategies. And I started looking into our MS psychology and worked with the clinical psychology programs to see how we could improve our curriculum that would welcome all of our students from diverse background. And that is the time I had the opportunity to become the program director for developmental psychology program. And we built this program from the scratch. There was not a course that we had priorly developed. And so we pretty much, excuse me, started from the scratch. then that's the time we thought we would take advantage of this opportunity where we could purposefully include different cross-cultural and multicultural and diverse component into our curriculum. So we developed almost all of the courses from the scratch, except for some stat and research design courses. And so when we are developing the program, we started with the course outcomes. So we knew what kind of courses, some basic developmental psychology courses that we needed, such as lifespan development, some introductory courses, what we call themes and theories of development, developmental psychology, culture and psychology. So we started with the course outcomes. You know, for example, how we asked the students to analyze, it is the course outcome is analyze how normative social and emotional development and individual differences through the lifespan vary as a function of culture and context. And here we are explaining very formally, following the rules and the protocol that we follow. But basically, we wanted our students to learn about, you know, different normative social and emotional development. That means how our social development, our emotional development are, you know, different in different cultures, how it's different individually, and how it can be influenced greatly by the culture we are raised in and the context we are, you know, we are being developed in. Next slide, please. So, so from our the outcomes, the course outcomes, we developed the weekly learning objectives. For different weeks, we have different learning objectives. I will talk about several examples here. So we wanted to incorporate, you know, like cross-cultural components into our applications and analysis in every week. And different weeks we have discussion posts as well as applications. So in one of the weeks, the examples of the learning objectives is analyze aging from cross-cultural and international perspectives. We know that we age in every culture, that's a global phenomenon, but how our aging varies from culture to culture. In some of the Eastern cultures, aging is happening much more with a familial context, whereas in Western culture, aging happens in a much more individualistic context. It's not collectivist society, so we age in a Western culture in a much more independent way. We have our own lives independent of others' wishes and growth. So that's one of the examples. We also wanted to analyze the benefits of studying gerontology from a global and international perspectives. So because we cannot use, you know, one-size-fits-all approach in every culture based on different cultural views and values. I know aging can be seen in a different ways, and so we needed to understand gerontology or aging from different perspectives. Next slide, please. So from weekly objectives, you know, those are contributing directly to the overall coursework. As I said earlier, objectives reflected in the course learning resources. So when we pull the resources, including textbook or research articles or podcasts or videos, we pull from different contexts, different cultures, so that our students can learn about the topics they're learning at that time from different cultural contexts. And we made sure the applications of the objectives are integrated into the discussions and assignments. So in most of the weeks, we were able to integrate cultural diversity or cultural sensitivity in our discussions and assignments. And the next slide, please. I will give you some examples of how we integrated it in our discussions. So one of the example is post a brief discussion of 2 factors that contribute to the sense of self in each of the 2 life stages you selected. Please discuss how gender and culture contribute to this development. So we have been thinking about the students will pick 2 factors that contribute to our sense of self in each of the 2 life stages. I might have picked childhood, I might have picked adolescence, or early adulthood, depending on which stages the students picked. And we wanted them to pull 2 factors in that stage that contributed to their sense of self. And we wanted to see how gender and culture contribute to this development. I mean, we all develop our, sense of self, within our cultural context. When we grow up, we don't even think about how our gender, how our environment, our culture is impacting the development of our self, the sense of self. It's so normal part of our life that we don't think through it. And we don't even think through how these differences happen in other people's view of themselves and how their gender or cultures impact their sense of self. So these are the things that we wanted our students to learn and critically think and then apply into their discussion. And another example of discussion would be respond to at least one of your colleagues' posts and explain the multicultural and the diversity considerations needed as they relate to the development of the milestone. And we definitely provided the examples or definition of the milestone in our post. Here we just pulled one of the discussions. And we wanted them to critically think. So when I see another student is presenting their own views, about the 2 factors they pulled and the gender and culture, how it contributed to their development. So we can bring in our own perspectives in terms of multicultural and diversity considerations. So here we come in, we are not only teaching our students about cultural components and diversity issues, but we are making them critically think and apply their own understanding and relate that one to the students' perspectives, another students' perspectives. And in the assignments element example would be explain how culture may impact the type of attachment. So we all know in different cultures, we have different types of attachments, based on the cultural norms and socialization practices. It can vary from culture to culture. An independent, individualistic culture might have a different types of attachment compared to a collectivistic culture where the children are raised with bigger family environment or extended family. So the attachment types, which is constituted as normal in one culture, might be totally different in another culture. So we wanted our students to learn about it. And I believe these are some of the examples of the courses that we developed, where we included and incorporated different aspects of multicultural and diversity components. And now I will hand it over to Dr. Masiello again.
Thank you. And I want to piggyback on what you just said by just adding that, when I teach in these courses where these inclusive elements are infused throughout the curriculum, you really do see a feeling of acceptance in the classroom climate. It really does invite engagement from students. And students see it as just normal. It's just the thing you do to talk about a lot of different viewpoints. And that really does open up a lot of open and honest discussion and people feeling comfortable speaking from their own perspective. So taking it from the curriculum level and bringing it down to the classroom level, I want to start again by saying it does take some effort. We often want to teach in the ways that are comfortable to us, what's based on our own background, our experiences, and our interests. But the examples that we use and the way that we talk about the material might not be relatable to those who have perspectives that differ from ours. And so if we are only speaking from our own perspective, we lose opportunities to engage students with the material. So, if I'm not intentional to be inclusive myself, coming from a Western background, it's very natural for me to want to speak from my own Western experience. So using examples that are very Westernized and names and the stories. A quick example is one time I used a football analogy, and I really didn't think twice about having used that until a student was confused about the reference because he was from a different culture where football referred to soccer. And so when he posted about that, I realized, what I had done. And so it was a reminder for me, I had to go back and explain I meant American football and explain the analogy. So we have to be mindful of how we can even unintentionally speak from our own frame of reference. And as we're trying to create a classroom environment where everybody feels included and understands. So one strategy that we can use when we do think about, what are some easy, simple things that we can do to make our classroom more inclusive? One strategy is just to be aware of the social issues that are affecting our students. There are a lot of really current things going on, like the Black Lives Matter, the Me Too example, the pandemic, that really are affecting people in many different ways. To use the pandemic, because it's such a current issue right now that's happening currently, there's a lot of data that's coming out which shows that for those students who identify as LGBTQ, having family ties that are weakened because of families who have not been accepting of their orientation has really impacted the ability for them to get support that they need if they lose their job or if they need to leave an abusive relationship. In fact, they're seeing higher reports of domestic violence in some areas because of this. So these are really important topics to our students, especially for the students that are, directly or indirectly affected by them in some way. And so if we can infuse these very important topics into what we discuss with our students, and we invite them to have these open, respectful conversations about them, it really can promote engagement and enhance learning for everybody. Some other examples are to use student pronouns, like ask them what their pronouns are. Do they want he and him? Do they want they and them? Students might not feel comfortable saying to you, here are my pronouns. But if you ask them and invite that opportunity for them to share, they're going to be likely to tell you so that you can be respectful to them in the classroom and make them feel included. And use a student's chosen name instead of a given name. This comes across in many different ways, but for some students who are transgender, they have already started using their chosen name in their everyday lives. This is the name that they identify with, but it might be that the legal paperwork that we have on record at Walden on the roster, or their birth certificates, their transcripts, some of their other identification hasn't caught up to that chosen name. And so if we ask students what that name is and use that name, then we're being respectful to their identity. And again, we're making them feel included and welcome to be who they are in our classroom. And we want to be aware of our own implicit biases. How does our own particular background or our own education influence the way that we shape our discussions and the feedback that we give? We want to use vignettes or examples that really are diverse, that represent both Eastern and Western perspectives, that have maybe same-sex couples instead of just, heterosexual couples. And we want to use culturally responsive teaching practices. And these type of practices differ from traditional ones because they include research and writings from other cultures and those that are from diverse authors. So what we're trying to do is really find that hook and anchor that's going to help draw students into the content using their past experiences. And these practices will help expose our students to a really wide, diverse community, and that's going to help them have different interpretations of the content. Next slide, please. And we want to discuss options or give discussion options to students of having written or audio or video format so that students can communicate with us and engage with the material in whatever way best conveys their thoughts. So it really helps students be involved in the discussions, which are such an integral part of the experience of Walden. You know, discussions really are the basis for much of student engagement. So we really want students to be involved in them and engage with one another, because again, that's going to create the sense of a learning community instead of the feeling of learning in isolation. So whatever way we can get students to share their perspectives is really important. And we want to pose questions to really encourage those different perspectives. You know, if you invite the discussion of different perspectives, it's going to make it easier for students to offer their different viewpoints and how they see things through their different lenses, because now they can give their thoughts in response to your question. And again, that removes anxiety they might feel in bringing up their own different viewpoint than maybe what others have shared. It's a lot easier to share your viewpoint if it's different, if it's been invited. You know, if I can say, hey, Dr. Masiello asked this, you know, I'm just answering it, than to feel like I'm putting something out there that others in the class might not agree with or might not relate to. And it's important that we post positive feedback when students give perspectives that differ from everybody else. You know, I try to be very intentional of seeing when it is that a student does share a unique perspective. And then I make a point of responding to that post in a very positive way, because that encourages more from that student. But it also encourages other students who might even have very similar viewpoints to join in the discussion and feel comfortable speaking up. So powerful or positive reinforcement really is a powerful tool that we have in our classroom. And then, you know, final point is really to select different voices in the materials and the resources shared. And these can be done by the case studies that we use, you know, picking, you know, if we show videos like different types of TED Talks from different people from different backgrounds, sharing quotes from those of different perspectives. All of these things give students a feeling that lots of people, so to speak, are represented or, you know, in that classroom in terms of who's speaking to them. So I want to just wrap up here by mentioning the fact that there are even studies now that show that when we increase inclusivity in our classroom, it eliminates unintentional barriers that can really get in the way of a student's ability to relate to the course material and to relate to you. And when these barriers are removed, that helps increase students' engagement in their learning. And this is going to have that byproduct, hopefully, of fostering student retention in the program and even helping to improve completion outcomes. So I, Dr. Tracy Masiello, and my co-presenters, Dr. Sarkar and Dr. Pinion, thank you for taking time to listen to this information.
Thank you. And on the screen is the contact information for Dr. Masiello, Sarkar, and Pinion. So please don't hesitate to reach out to them if you have any questions. I really appreciate your time in today's session for carving out time to listen to the recording and to our presenters for offering this insightful information. Thank you so much, everyone.